Nobody ever thought this day would come. We thought it was just a myth, a tale told around the campfire like the swamp rework, the early game collapse, and those two guys who are still playing killer clowns. It was a dream we all thought would never come true. But that's the thing about dreams. Sometimes they do come true. I guess what I'm really trying to say here is... Welcome to prime time, boys! Alright, sorry, I would do the full quote, but YouTube doesn't like swearing within 30 seconds of the video starting. So, welcome friends and foes, survivors and killers, to behaviour's new nightmare, the Freddy rework. I still can't quite believe I'm making this video. Freddy's rework is on the PTB right now, and it's better than I expected. As a major horror fan, I've been very invested in the Freddy rework for quite some time. Nightmare on Elm Street has never been my favourite series. Too many dud movies in my opinion. But I have a soft spot for Freddy himself and will always respect the impact that Freddy has had on the world of horror. As such, Freddy's state of neglect as part of DBD has always been a point of frustration. Freddy was probably the biggest name DBD had until the Alien chapter, at least among general public's knowledge. He should not have been anywhere near this bad or this boring for this long, but that era is finally over. Before I get into what's actually in this rework, I want to be upfront about my overall thoughts on this PTB. The Freddy rework is a good one, a massive improvement over his dire previous state, but that doesn't mean it's perfect. Freddy on the PTB is a good change, but with the appropriate tuning he's a hop, skip and a jump away from being a great one. So let's talk about it. Freddy on the PTB has broadly the same sleep mechanics that he does on live, with a minor tweak or two. Survivors start the trial awake and gradually fall asleep after a minute-long timer, becoming oblivious when they do fall asleep. Survivors can be woken up by another awake survivor or by failing a skill check, and wake up when they are downed. This is mostly the same as live Freddy, but there's a couple of big changes. Whenever a sleeping survivor is healing or being healed, Freddy sees their killer instinct and can teleport to them in a similar way to Pinhead teleporting to the Lament configuration, and there's been a change to the clock system. Now any survivor can wake up at any of the clocks on the map, rather than in a specific clock. The sleep changes are kind of a side grade. It is now easier to wake up than ever, but far more dangerous to stay asleep, since you can't effectively reset while asleep. But it's Freddy's dream powers and manifestations that changed a lot more, and so to make the new iteration of Freddy far, far stronger. Freddy has three powers: Dream Snares, Dream Pallets, and his Dream Projection teleport. Dream Projection got souped up quite a bit, with the cooldown reduced to 30 seconds and the ability to use its teleport to any generator on the map, completed, uncompleted or even blocked gens included. This is on top of teleporting to healing survivors, although it does come at the cost of being unable to be cancelled once you start using it. Dream Snares and Pallets have also been revamped. Now Dream Pallets, of which Freddy has up to 8, can be manually ruptured by the killer after a 1.5 second arming time. Ruptured pallets deal a health state of damage to sleeping survivors who are within 3 meters of the explosion range, and instantly sleep any awake survivors. But their range is unfortunately pretty small, and they can be dropped during the rupture time to cancel the explosion and the damage. As a trade-off, these dream pallets can also be used to stun the killer, even though they break as soon as they're dropped, effectively making them the Anniversary's party pallets if they were also bombs. This turns Freddy into, in theory, our 4th trap killer, since the dream pallets become an independent threat separate from Freddy himself. By far the biggest change is the shift to Dream Snares. To the point I'd hardly ever call them snares anymore. Instead of puddles of cranberry sauce Freddy spills on the floor, Dream Snares now move by themselves, firing towards survivors after a very brief wind-up time, kinda like an angry little Roomba full of blood. These snares add 30 seconds to the sleep timer of any awake survivors they hit, but if the survivor is asleep they will instead scream and receive a 12% hinder for 4 seconds. This power has a very short cooldown, only about 5 seconds, meaning that an asleep survivor can be constantly hindered by chaining together Dream Snares. And on top of that, almost every add-on Freddy has been changed too, to make them actually worth running now that Pallets are base kit and he doesn't have 3 to 4 add-ons dedicated entirely to bringing them anymore. This is the most comprehensive power overhaul we've seen in a long time, and it's a gigantic shift in power for Freddy. On live servers, Freddy is a bottom 3 killer, only kept out of the actual bottom of the barrel slot of worst killer in the game by a new arrival who collapsed into D tier back in October. I can't say with any level of certainty how good Freddy is now. My initial instinct is to compare him to maybe Dredge or Demogorgon in terms of power. Certainly no S tier, but leaps and bounds better than he was. In all fairness, I've not played too many games on the PTB. Queue times were so bad I assembled all of these miniatures while waiting in queue, and now my room smells of plastic glue. But Freddy not being awful anymore isn't the point of this video. What should be celebrated is the change in design philosophy that allowed Freddy to receive these extra injections of power, and how when the readjustments given to new Freddy's kit, those of us who were around for old Freddy might start to see something a little familiar. That's not to say there aren't some issues here though. Freddy's rework is conceptually a slam dunk, but in classic behaviour fashion it needs some noteworthy changes from its PTB state to be the best it can be. It's a good rework, but it's almost great, and the issues here are mostly to do with dream pallets. Despite how compelling the concept is, dream pallets are very rarely useful in matches, because the effort you go to set up and use them is way too much for how easy they are to play around and identify. There are two different ways dream pallets can be used. You can either just put them down a tile as you arrive there, or set them up ahead of time. I think by giving you 8 pallets at once, the game wants you to set them up ahead of time, but there's not really a big reason to. The first issue is that dream pallets are far too easy to identify to be effective traps. When you get close to a fake pallet, it shimmers to let you know it's fake. And even without the shimmer, there's a lot of environmental clues to let you know a pallet isn't real if you apply a little bit of game sense. If you spot 2 pallets who are too close together, you see Freddy holding his hand out as you approach the pallet, or just see a pallet while asleep that you didn't see while awake, congratulations, you found a dream pallet. Hell, Windows Opportunity is the most common survivor perk in the game, and it hard counters pallets by giving you perfect pallet information on a decent distance. If you set pallets up as traps, the survivors can very easily tell which ones are fakes and drop them to disarm them, especially if they're on comms, meaning that the best way to use them would theoretically be using them on the go, dropping them in a tile as you get to it. But that's not only really boring, it's also kind of pointless. If you have room to place a pallet inside a tile, there was probably a pallet in that spot to begin with, a pallet that you've already forced out and broken. So the survivor you're chasing is heading to a tile with its resource already used, and you're choosing to give them a potentially playable resource that can stun you. You have a 12% hinder in your pocket, just slow them down and hit them already. We'll go back to the snares later, but there's another issue with pallets. They're way too clunky and reactable to be worth the effort to use. The radius is short and the explosion arming time is huge, meaning that even if a survivor doesn't realise a pallet is fake until Freddy blows it up, there's still plenty they can do to avoid it. It's not hard to run out of the blast radius, and in situations where a survivor is too close to escape the blast, dropping the pallet will cancel the explosion anyway. This does lose the survivor some distance, but not very much. If the Freddy is any significant distance away, the distance lost from a pallet drop is pretty meaningless. But if he's too close to you, you might be able to stun him with the pallet when you drop it. So for a dream pallet to feel useful, Freddy has to find or create a place for the pallet to be deployed, hope nobody checks the area before he can take a chase there and destroys it, hope your chase target doesn't realise and part into it, wait for the survivor to be running past the undropped pallet when you're both close enough to M1 if they drop it, but not so close that a drop will stun you too. And the survivor has to be asleep, and then and only then are you allowed to get a health state with your power if you time it right, and the survivor can't path away from the pallet in time. If there were any more hoops to jump through, then Freddy could make a living travelling the land as a circus performer called the Magnificent Acrobatic Dream Nonce. It should be clear by now that dream pallets are cool in theory but struggle in practice. My recommendation here is to remove or at least heavily nerf the shimmering effect that tells the survivor if a pallet is fake. If the shimmer has to exist at all, then survivors can't be expected to rely on environmental clues and game sense and, think about what they're doing, and the range should be significantly reduced to the point that you can only see it when you can actually drop the pallet, forcing survivors to commit to an area with a dream pallet in it before they can learn if it's real or not. I'd also like to see rupture interactions cleaned up, whether that's an increase to the pallet explosion range, or a decrease in the arming delay, or the removal of the ability to drop an exploding pallet, or even a combination of these things. There's almost certainly a recipe to make dream pallet interactions more meaningful, and it's the biggest barrier to enjoying the killer in my opinion. Without pallets, he's just another mid-range zoner. Speaking of mid-range zoning, Freddy's other power, dream snares, are much stronger than pallets and far more ubiquitous in terms of situations where they can be used. Perhaps a little too ubiquitous. The 12% hinder lasts for 4 seconds, and the power is on a 5-second cooldown, meaning that by the time the snare travels and the hinder lingers, your power is almost back again. And they fire very fast and hit through walls and objects, so a halfway decent Freddy will just keep you hindered effectively permanently. This is really oppressive and frustrating, but also nothing that a cooldown nerf couldn't fix. Taking it to 7 or maybe 8 seconds would be perfect to keep them impactful without feeling too spammy. There's only a couple more minor issues that I'm seeing aside from snares and pallets. Sleep immunity and slugging with a teleport. Now that any survivor can wake up from any alarm clock, sleep immunity just doesn't really need to exist anymore. It was necessary for old Freddy back when only one clock could be used, but because you would travel across the map to wake up at the clock and would fall half asleep again by the time you got back. The sleep immunity helped mitigate this problem. But now you can wake up very easily, so between being awake and being immune, a good team will spend far more of the match immune to your power than they will actually asleep. And there's nothing you can do about that. Get rid of sleep immunity altogether, it doesn't really need to exist anymore. The only other problem with new Freddy is the interactions that his new teleport has with slugs. A downed survivor wakes up instantly, but if an asleep survivor tries to heal them off the floor, Freddy immediately gets teleport back and contests the pickup. This forces anyone who wants to pick a slug up to wake up first, and makes slugging with Freddy way too risk-free. This could easily suck to play against, especially with a perk like Knockout involved, but a simple fix would be making it only apply to healing injured survivors, and this issue would solve itself. So yeah, Freddy's new power is not perfect, but none of these changes are outside the scope of a PTB. And given how vigilant behaviour have been lately with polishing killers and hotfixes, for better or worse, I would imagine there's been lots of follow-up changes to Freddy before and after his arrival on Live. Make no mistake though, even in its PTB state, this rework is a roaring success. Not just in terms of buffing the killer, but in playing more directly into the fantasy Freddy offers. A great example is how the dream snares and pallet changes directly add to the sleep meter of awake survivors, because it gives Freddy back something that he's not had for years. The ability to pick out a victim and manually put them to sleep. This was a hallmark of launch Freddy that many players missed out on, so seeing it back and puzzled into the tools that new Freddy has in his kit was pretty inspired. Same thing goes for his new teleport to healing players. The dream world is Freddy's playground, and when you're in it you should never feel safe. Even when you're miles from the killer, you can't rest or recover because he will capitalise on your moment of weakness. Hell, Red Paintbrush's new effect makes this acknowledgement explicit. It just gives Freddy the old effect of his power with the long-range aura reading. As such, Freddy's newest version harkens back to the feelings players got from playing old Freddy. He feels like Freddy in a way he hasn't for years while still being mechanically adjacent to his easier to balance new iteration. I'm seeing old Freddy players coming back from the grave to appreciate what we have and lick their lip anticipation for its live release. It's brilliant. Nature is healing. This is how a rework should feel. The character hasn't been deleted, but instead given a facelift and a new lease of life. A new coat of paint to better suit the character for the modern age of DVD. So in summation, Freddy's rework is really good, and with some tinkering, could end up being remembered as one of Dead by Daylight's all-time greatest reworks on the level of Doctor or Knight. Fortunately, that tinkering is what a PTB is for. And with the feedback from this one being as clear and seemingly unanimous as it is, I suspect he's going to get those changes. The Freddy rework has added a potential new killer to my roster, something I wasn't expecting for at least another half a year. So I am really excited to see new Freddy come to life. Really excited. But more than anything else, the Freddy rework gives me hope. Not a lot of hope, but a little hope. For another killer who's very close to my heart. Come on, we all knew I was going to make this about her, right? Like, seriously, this is what we're talking about. Skull Merchant's rework is obviously impending, we all know that. But we know it won't be for a little bit now. We've got at least 2 chapters in Mid-Chapter Survivor and the Trickster D work to come before then, and that's even assuming it arrives at its earliest possible opportunity and doesn't get delayed at all. I've kind of been dreading Merchant's rework because I have very little reason to believe it's going to go well. Pretty much every change I've ever made to Merchant since the rework has shown they don't understand the character, and I've seen a great many people more or less baying for her blood. There's every chance behaviour gives the ultra whiners what they want again, and nuke my favourite killer into oblivion. But the fantastic quality of Freddy's changes show that behaviour's minds are open to something better. Granted, Freddy doesn't have a death warrant placed on him by half the community, but let's be real, he had a less distinct mechanical identity than Merchant has ever had, and his forms of skill expression are way more limited. If they had enough they could salvage from Freddy to make this rework function while keeping him broadly the way he always was, then they can definitely do the same to Merchant, if they want to. If they do to her what they did to Freddy, maybe we have something to look forward to when that rework eventually comes. Freddy's rework represents a paradigm shift. Possibly the first time in 8 years where this killer isn't just a bad joke. Where Freddy Krueger has finally become the nightmare he was always supposed to be. And we can only hope that future reworks are done with this level of love for the character, its identity, and its player base. Maybe it is all wishful thinking, maybe it is just a dream. But if this is a dream, then I don't want to wake up.